Greetings, guitar fanatics. Here we are again. Hey, let's talk arpeggios today. Arpeggios, along with scales, are great building blocks for guitar solos. But the way I see and hear so many players and students using arpeggios, I have to wonder if they see arpeggios as a legitimate melodic musical device, or they just see them as some sort of technique trick. Something they can learn 2 or 3 random shapes of and play as fast as possible in hopes to sound impressive. I've worked with many students that can blaze through 2 or 3 of those arpeggio shapes that sit just right on the fretboard like wildfire. But when I ask them to play different voicings or different inversions in a different part of the guitar, I'm usually met with a blank stare or at best some fumbling around on the strings. They may have memorized a shape or two, but what they didn't do was really learn the notes of the arpeggio and how those intervals relate to one another and how they relate to the chords that you might be soloing over. If you happen to be struggling with arpeggios, well, you are in luck, because today I'm going to show you, well, I was going to use the word trick, but it's more like a complete system. It's really simple because it's all about one shape that you can use to play many different arpeggios. But it's also super enlightening, and I promise you, if you spend a little time practicing this, you're going to have a completely different level of understanding of arpeggios, to the point where you're going to be able to create your own shapes all over the fretboard. Hey, do me a favor before we get into this and like the video, subscribe to the channel. My name is Charlie Long. Let's play some guitar. Now, here's what makes this system so easy to understand and use. We're not going to be memorizing a bunch of strange shapes and boxes. I'm not even going to bog you down with loads of music theory today. This system is all about recognizing one shape, and that shape is playing 2 notes per string on 2 strings at a time. I'm sure that's something you're familiar with because that's how we learned the pentatonic scale, 2 notes a string. But we're going to take our shape with those 4 notes, and we're going to learn how to change 1 note at a time to make many different arpeggios. Now, here's the only theory that you're going to need right now. The arpeggios that we're going to play today come right out of the major scale. And let's play in the key of G. The G major scale has the notes G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. If we start with the G and we pick every other note, we get the notes G, which is the first note of the scale or the root, B, which is the 3rd note of the scale, and it's the major 3rd, that's going to be important, D, which is the 5th note of the scale, and F sharp, which is the major 7th. So this arpeggio has a major 3rd, so it's a major arpeggio, and it has the major 7th, so it's appropriately called a major 7th arpeggio. All the arpeggios we play today are going to be 4-note 7th arpeggios of some kind. So here's our master shape, starting with the G note at the 3rd fret of the low E string, the B note at the 7th fret, the D note at the 5th fret of the A string, and the F sharp at the 9th fret of the A string. 2 notes per string, 2 strings, and that gives us a 4-note shape that we're going to call the root arpeggio form because it starts on that G note, our root. Here's the really awesome thing about this system and why it's easy to understand, but super useful in teaching you not just about arpeggios, but basically the entire fretboard. If we learn a box shape arpeggio vertically across the strings, it can be tough to memorize and play because you might have 2 notes on one string, and then 1 note on the next string, 2 notes on the next string, and it can seem sort of random, but playing the arpeggios horizontally like this not only makes it easy to memorize, but there's symmetry in the shape. If we want to play a 2-octave arpeggio, we just go over 2 strings and up 2 frets from the starting note of the arpeggio that we just played. So we had started on the G on the 3rd fret of the low E. So if we go over 2 strings to the D string and we go up 2 frets to the 5th fret, well, that's a G note too, and we can play our shape again. And we can keep it going for another octave. So we got to go over 2 strings from D, that's our B string. But this time we've got to go up 3 frets because the B string is tuned differently than the others. So now we're at the 8th fret of the B string, that's a G note, and here's our shape again. Putting all those together from the G on the low E string, here's our first octave, second octave, third octave. Very, very cool. And here's what I think is a really huge value of playing arpeggios like this. Because the shape is so simple, and because we're not just trying to sweep across it as fast as humanly possible, we can get really familiar with the sound of those four notes and how they relate to the chords that we're soloing over. I've actually gotten to where I call all these shapes chord skeletons because they kind of look like bones laying across the fretboard. But we can take these chord skeletons and use them as melodic devices that outline the chords that we're soloing over. And we can use them as jumping off points for creating more licks. For instance, I could play our shape on the E, A, and D strings. Now, I just outlined a G major 7 perfectly, and then I could jump off into a lick like this. Or I could play all 3 octaves. And that puts me right up at that 12th fret with the G major, E minor pentatonic shape. And I could play a lick from there. The point I'm trying to make is now we can see and hear arpeggios as part of the melody that we're trying to play when we improvise, not just some trick that we do to try to look flashy and fill up space. I told you earlier that we're going to be able to take this 2 strings, 4 note shape, change 1 note at a time, and play several different arpeggios. So let's get into that now. We're going to start with another major sounding arpeggio, the dominant 7 arpeggio. And we get a dominant 7 arpeggio by taking the major 7 note, in this case it was an F sharp, and flattening it 1 fret. So now our arpeggio has the notes G, B, D, F. And now we've got an arpeggio we could play over some blues or country changes where they use a lot of dominant 7 chords. Now, of course, all the chords we play over are not going to be major chords, so how about creating a minor arpeggio? All we have to do there is take the dominant 7th arpeggio and flatten the B note, which is the 3rd of G. And now we'd call that note the minor 3rd, and we've got a minor arpeggio with that F, the natural F, which is the flat 7 on top. We've got the notes G, B flat, D, and F. And that forms the G minor 7 arpeggio. As with the major 7 and dominant 7 arpeggios, we can take this thing all the way up the fretboard. We've got 1 octave, 2nd octave, 3rd octave. And we could at any time stop playing the arpeggio and use it as a jumping off point for the rest of a lick, something like this. And not to keep repeating myself, but playing arpeggios like this, making them part of the melody. Sonically, I'm just feeling the arpeggio at a completely different level than if I just play some shape to play something fast. Okay, let's touch on 2 more arpeggios that you won't use as often as those first 3, but you still need to know. The next one would be a minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished arpeggio. Minor 7 flat 5 is just what it sounds like. We're going to take our minor 7 arpeggio that has the notes G, B flat, D, and F, and we're going to take the D, which is the 5th note of the G scale, and we're going to flatten it 1 fret. So now we're going to have G, B flat, D flat, and F. And we can take that up our 3 octaves. And that gives us something to play should we come across a minor 7 flat 5 chord somewhere in a chord chart. Now, the last arpeggio we're going to look at today is the diminished 7 arpeggio. And just as with our other arpeggios, we get it by changing 1 note from the previous type of arpeggio we just played. So here, we're going to take our half diminished arpeggio, which had the notes G, B flat, D flat, and F, and we're going to flatten that F one more fret. So the G diminished 7 arpeggio would have the notes G, B flat, D flat, and E. And of course we can take that all the way up the neck too. Here's our first octave, second octave, third octave. And of course, diminished arpeggios have applications in everything from really cool uses in the blues to neoclassical heavy metal. So let's review the concept. We have a master shape, which is 2 notes on 2 strings. We started with that major 7th arpeggio, which had the scale tones 1, 3, 5, major 7. We made a dominant 7 arpeggio by flattening the 7. So we've got 1, 3, 5, flat 7. Then we made a minor 7th arpeggio out of the dominant 7 by flattening the 3rd. So now we've got the root, minor 3rd, 5th, flat 7th. Then we made a minor 7th flat 5 arpeggio out of our minor 7th arpeggio by flattening that 5th degree. So we've got 1, flat 3rd, flat 5, and the flat 7. And then lastly, we turned that into a fully diminished arpeggio by flattening that 7th again. So we've got the root, which is our G, B flat, D flat, and E. And now I'm going to show you how to really unlock the power of this system. You can start arpeggios on notes other than the root, and when we do that, we call that an inversion. Let's take a quick look at what this means. Our root shape of G major 7, we have the notes G, B, D, and F sharp. Well, what if we move up to the 7th fret, we start on the B, which is the 3rd, and we play B, D, F sharp, and G. We would call that the first inversion. If we move up to the D and we play D, F sharp, G, and B, we call that the second inversion. And then if we move up to F sharp and we play F sharp, G, B, and D, we call that the third inversion. And with each of these inversions, we can use the same move over 2 strings and up system that we did with our root form to play 3-octave arpeggios. Here's our root form of major 7 again. Here's the first inversion starting on the B note at the 7th fret of the E string and going up 3 octaves. Here's the second inversion starting on the D note at the 10th fret of the E string, going up 3 octaves. And lastly, here's the third inversion starting at the F sharp at the 14th fret of the E string, going up 3 octaves. So let's take one of the inversions and go through the process of creating our 5 different types of arpeggios. I'm going to start with the third inversion, the F sharp up at the 14th fret of the low E string. Our major 7 would be F sharp, G, B, and D. For dominant 7, we would flatten the F sharp down to F, so then we would have F, G, B, and D. Major 7, dominant 7. For minor 7, we take dominant 7 and we flatten the B, so then we would have F, G, B flat, and D. For minor 7 flat 5, we take the minor 7 arpeggio, we flatten that D or the 5th, so now we would have F, G, B flat, and D flat. And lastly, for that diminished 7th, we would take the minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio, we would flatten the 7th again, so now we have the notes E, G, B flat, D flat. I'll leave it to you guys to chart out the other inversions so that this video doesn't end up being 30 minutes long. So there it is, one of the best, simplest, and most efficient ways I know of to learn and play the most common and useful arpeggios on the guitar. Hopefully you've gotten the notion that arpeggios aren't just some flashy trick. They're an important melodic device that's massively important to outlining chords when you improvise. I also hope the notes that make up the various arpeggios are much more clear to you now, as is the relationship of the various arpeggios that we were able to create by taking that major 7 and just changing one note at a time. Thanks for watching as always. I really do appreciate it. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. We're putting out more great guitar stuff every week. As always, work hard, play hard, have fun, and never stop learning. I'll see you next time.